Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in for another show. Welcome to all of our members, subscribers, and viewers from all across the world. As usual, if you're new to my live streams, I usually go through the latest updates that I want to talk to you about, and then I'll give the space for the community for any participation, any questions, and I would hopefully address the majority of them. Tonight, I wanted to talk to you about a few things. Number one, the funeral of the late martyrs, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Sayyid Hashim Safiyuddin, who led Hezbollah during the Israeli aggression against Lebanon. The meanings of that funeral, those who attended, what kind of messages we heard, the word of the Secretary General of Hezbollah, the current Secretary General, Naim Qassem, and what that means for the future. Are we looking towards an escalation, perhaps, now that this funeral is out of the way and Israel is still present in South Lebanon? Or will it be a case of the Lebanese state potentially having more responsibility? Then the progress in relation to the ceasefire in Gaza, Benjamin Netanyahu delaying the release of 600 Palestinian hostages and prisoners. And now more statements coming from the Palestinian side that, no, actually there's positive signs from the mediators. We've had talks about everything, and it looks like things are going to be resolved before Thursday. I'm going to give you all of those details and how Benjamin Netanyahu actually took that decision that was against the security advice in Israel. And the final thing that we will be talking about tonight is Yemen. The United States confirmed that Nasrallah in Yemen, they targeted an F-16 fighter jet, and they also shot an MQ-9 again. Why did that happen? Was it actually the Houthis? And what is the United States still doing in Yemen now that there's a ceasefire? Nasrallah, they're no longer attacking ships in the Red Sea. Everything is moving normally. Why is that? And are they planning something else against Yemen? Let's start off with Lebanon. Lebanon, this was the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General who was martyred during the war on Lebanon alongside the genocide of Gaza. This was a very symbolic funeral coming in Lebanon for various reasons. The scope, the size, millions of people were present, many of them from many countries around the world, people from the United States, people from Latin America, people from Europe, many Arab countries, many Asian countries too, going there for that funeral. It was set up in one of the biggest stadiums in Beirut, and they will be having a shrine now next to that area, the airport path in Lebanon. Why was it so popular? What did Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah mean to those who followed him, and why did he attract people visiting him from all across the world, despite the labeling and propaganda against Hezbollah and against himself personally, including sanctions globally and lots of other things too? Well, the man has been leading the Lebanese, or was leading the Lebanese Hezbollah for over 30 years, since the beginning of the 90s. And he was a fierce man, standing up against oppression, standing up against occupation, supporting the liberation of the Lebanese people from Israeli occupation, and supporting the oppressed people in Lebanon, and also the Palestinian people as well. Hezbollah, in many cases where there was an escalation in Palestine, Hezbollah were the first group to participate in support of Palestine. After the Al-Aqsa flood was launched by Hamas exclusively, and later more groups started to participate in countries, Hezbollah was the first movement to declare that they have entered Al-Aqsa flood as a supporting front. And that happened on the 8th of October. They entered as a supporting front. However, later on, it led to an all-out war, following which very senior figures from the first line of Hezbollah, we're talking about leaders who have been there since the establishment of the movement in the 80s against the Israeli occupation, foreign occupation in Lebanon. And they paid for it with their lives alongside the Lebanese people, primarily those of the south of Lebanon. However, in other parts too, there were many casualties. In Lebanon, approximately 6,000 martyrs. Many people lost their homes. Israel wreaked havoc and caused a lot of destruction in the south. And at the end of the day, it's as simple as follows. Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated because of his position for Gaza, because he stood up for the Palestinian people, because he had the courage to refuse all of the attempts to submit to the pressure of the Zionist and American terrorists and their allies when it comes to Lebanon and Palestine and Gaza. And he paid for it with his life. And people have appreciation for that. That's why there was such a global presence and massive presence from the people in Lebanon as well. There were two main messages from the event itself, without going into the details of what has been said in that event and those who were present in that event. The first message was international. Internationally, there is a global support for the idea and the concept of resistance against US-led mass terrorism. That's number one. People are not afraid to voice that resistance and show solidarity and support. Number two, it was a message for Lebanon, for people inside of Lebanon and people in the region. Why? For various reasons. Number one, there is a notion among those who hate Hezbollah for one reason or another. They oppose them religiously, or they oppose them because of their previous positions in Syria, or they oppose them politically in Lebanon. They believe that they have too much power and that the power should be in the hands of the state. They oppose them because they simply serve the enemies of the people of the region. They have various reasons. Many of them have an approach now, and they are saying that Hezbollah is finished. Hezbollah is roasted. There's an end to the era of Hezbollah. And they interpret Hezbollah's key decision-making inside of Lebanon and on a regional basis as well as weakness. How? Well, number one, they accepted a ceasefire. Number two, they're no longer attacking Israel. Number three, they are not responding to Israeli breaches of the ceasefire in Lebanon, which makes them look weak. Now, that argument in itself, is not very strong for various reasons. Number one, the ceasefire began, after Israel asked for a ceasefire. The ceasefire began after Hezbollah in Lebanon bombarded Israel with over 500 missiles in one day, on the final day before the ceasefire took place. And the continuation of the ceasefire in Lebanon does not mean that Hezbollah evaporated. They have the structure. As a matter of fact, they were continuously attacking Israel and increasing their attacks despite the heavy blows that they got with the pager attack and with the assassination of their first line leaders, military and political leaders. Despite all of that, they were continuing. And all of that means that, well, they're strong and they can fight. However, they are taking a decision to halt the war at the moment, have a ceasefire, They have many calculations that are external and internal too. And clearly at that time, that ceasefire was tied with the ceasefire in Gaza, because there were reports that were really not declared, you had to dig for them, that the ceasefire in Lebanon would eventually lead to a ceasefire with Gaza. And if there is no ceasefire with Gaza, then the attacks would continue from Lebanon. And the Palestinian resistance was included in the ceasefire agreement of Lebanon itself. Hezbollah is a movement. They were speaking with the Palestinian groups led by Hamas, and they were asking them about the ceasefire in Lebanon. What's your thoughts? Do you think we should go ahead? And of course, the Palestinian resistance said, of course, go ahead with the ceasefire. We want what's good for Lebanon, and you had your position. And then there, of course, was the ceasefire in Gaza. Despite all of the flaws, by the way, and those flaws in the ceasefire or breaches of the ceasefire are intended by Israel to show strength, to try and show strength, because they have been defeated and humiliated. The heads of their child murdering soldiers in Gaza have been under the ground in Gaza. So it's a big humiliation. They want to recover by breaching the ceasefire, by attacking, by invading, by occupying points in Lebanon and in Syria, by increasing in the West Bank. These shows of strength, quite pathetic. Like the fighter jets that flew over also. The event in Lebanon. So there was a video of the Israeli fighter jets flying over the event in Lebanon. That's one of them here. Where are we? So no one was intimidated by that. Really, the people were still pledging allegiance, and they were continuing with their chants for Hezbollah, calling the death for Israel, and continuing. All of these were signs of actual weakness from Israel. They do carry also a worrying sign, which is Lebanon is exposed. And we'll get to the points that were raised by the Secretary General of the future of Lebanon and how things would go. However, Israel wants to have some sort of an image of victory, and they do that by trying to flex muscles, breach the ceasefire. Now, the internal message was very strong. The resistance is very solid. It has a lot of popular support, and it's there to stay. Despite the blows, despite losing figures like Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and Hashim Safiyuddin, they are continuing. Which leads us to the messages. What were the messages that came from the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Sheikh Naim Qasim, who had a speech during that event and spoke about the following period, what things we should be expecting after the Israeli war and after Israel is also occupying parts of Lebanon now. So he had multiple messages, and the main messages were that, number one, now what Israel is doing, and the Israeli fighter jets went over the crowds when he was having his speech. But of course, you saw the people, they were continuing. He said that we're now in a position of aggression. We're no longer in a position of a ceasefire. We are in a position of an Israeli aggression and occupation of our lands. And by that, he is automatically trying to justify the resistance. However, there were other signs that showed that Hezbollah are not really interested in a really big war now. And it could be for various reasons. It could be for strategic purposes, political purposes. It could be due to the military limitations that they have. It could be for some of their belief systems. And he said this is not the great war, this is not the final war, and we know our military limitations. However, keeping the door open for resisting an occupation, because they have been resisting Israel since they were established and when they were far less capable. And they successfully expelled Israel from South Lebanon. The Lebanese resistance led by Hezbollah were the ones who liberated South Lebanon. There is no denying. However, he said that in the future, we will be giving the Lebanese state an option to diplomatically and politically expel Israel from Lebanon. And based on the results of that attempt from the Lebanese state, we will make our calculations and we will decide our actions. So, number one, confirming that the resistance is there to stay. There is no talk about disarming the resistance or anything as such. However, giving the state the option to solve things politically and diplomatically before beginning to attack Israel. And by the way, Hezbollah expelling Israel from 5 checkpoints just a few hundred meters into Lebanese territories, that's not going to be an issue. It isn't going to be an issue whatsoever. But the biggest question in relation to Lebanon that arises following the speech of Naim Qassem is as follows. Did Hezbollah have a certain time frame? Do they have a time frame in mind? Because they didn't mention anything about time. Are they going to give the Lebanese state weeks? Are they going to give them months? Are they going to give them years? These are questions, and there is no clear answer for them. If there is a time limit, if there's a time frame for Hezbollah, if there's an ultimatum that's been given to the state, then that would mean that after this ultimatum expires, they could be having a different approach. However, there is no ultimatum. And that's keeping things open for interpretation. From those who oppose Hezbollah, it works in their favor, because they would say, well, look, that's a proof that they have been weak. They're weak now. They've been dismantled. They no longer have presence. However, again, this could be a strategic move from Hezbollah so that they don't give any information to their enemy. Why? Because if they give an ultimatum, then they will be indicating the time of action, and they would lose the element of surprise. And if they lose the element of surprise, then they lost a big chunk of the prospect of succeeding in any military campaign against the Zionist terrorists inside of Lebanon. And that would be problematic for them. So these are the questions that arise. Is there an ultimatum? When will that happen? All of that is in the realm of the unknown at the moment with Lebanon. Moving on to the next subject that I wanted to talk to you about. Israel was due to release 600 Palestinian hostages and prisoners. However, they didn't. They did not. Benjamin Netanyahu decided that I'm not going to release them. Why, Bibi, you're not going to release them? It's because of the humiliating event that Hamas carries out when they release the Israeli prisoners of war. He's very worried about that event, because that event, well, kills billions that Israel spends in what they call the hasbara, or their propaganda, in just a couple of minutes. Hamas just posts a video in a few minutes. They destroy Israel. They destroy their narrative. They destroy everything to do with that state. So Benjamin Netanyahu is upset with that. You know, last thing he wants is someone going out from his people, kissing a Palestinian resistance fighter, and then calling it whatever they want to call it, right? problematic for him. But is there another reason for that? There may be another reason for that. And that reason could be linked directly to his allies in the Israeli government. So Axios had this report about this release of Hamas releasing the Israeli prisoners of war and Benjamin Netanyahu refusing to release the Palestinian prisoners. However, they said something very interesting. What they said is that Benjamin Netanyahu took this decision after a second meeting. The first meeting he had was with the security cabinet, with the security services leaders. And according to this report, they made a decision against that. No, they said Netanyahu, they warned him. They said, don't delay the release of the Palestinian prisoners. Why? Because that could lead Hamas to not return the bodies of the Israeli prisoners of war that are due to be released next Saturday. Meaning, Benjamin Netanyahu only sat with his yes men, Smotrich, the finance minister, and then he sat with Ron Dermer, his new poodle, and Israel Katz, another poodle, the defense minister. He only sat with them, and he decided to take that step. So people who aren't really concerned with security whatsoever, and he's going with them. Why? Because they're his yes men. He planted them there. Katz, well, Yoav Gallant was forced to eventually resign. Likewise, with the head of the Mossad, he was put aside, Ron Dermer instead. And of course, now we have a new IDF chief of staff. All of them yes men. So they're not going to challenge Benjamin Netanyahu, which means Benjamin Netanyahu again proves, like he has proven since the beginning of this barbaric genocide against the population, the Palestinian population in Gaza, that he doesn't necessarily consider Israel's strategic security as part of his plans. You're talking about a man who went on a campaign of barbaric bloodlust, pure barbarism, subhuman barbarism, including the mass killing of Israeli prisoners of war inside of Gaza, as evidence revealed since the initial weeks, really, of the ceasefire agreement, of the war in Gaza, the genocide in Gaza. But it's not only Benjamin Netanyahu and the security establishment having these different approaches and views. Because in the beginning, many figures in the Israeli security establishment and intelligence establishment were opposing the war outright, saying it's not good for our people in Gaza, and it's not necessarily a good strategy for us globally, internally. Let's deal with returning those people back, and then we can think of how we get this problem solved, the problem that's called Hamas, that they tried to eliminate multiple times before, and they constantly fail. There was also an article in one of the Israeli Institute, the INSS, Israeli Institute for National Security Studies, National Institute for Security Studies in Israel. And they had a long article during which these people are concerned with security matters, during which they said that, well, the long-awaited victory over Hamas was not achieved. What now? What should we do now? Because we haven't achieved this victory. We've been constantly talking about a victory over Hamas. We didn't achieve it. It did stop there, though. In that article, in that publication, they said Hamas humiliated Israel. Hamas humiliated Israel and caused it a military failure, the likes of which it has not experienced since its founding. You're talking about the INSS, tied with the University of Tel Aviv, saying that. That's not something surprising. 95% of the Israeli population believe that the state of Israel lost, and 5% only believe that Israel won. There's a consensus in Israel. That's why Benjamin Netanyahu is having these moves of flexing, of aggression, of shows of strength, pathetic signs of victory, trying to have signs of victory, a victory that he hasn't and will never achieve, Benjamin Netanyahu. And that's also running away from the humiliation in Gaza. He's going to Lebanon, going to Syria, threatening other countries too, tensions against Egypt and Jordan and Saudi Arabia. All of that is to run away from the fact that the man was absolutely humiliated and defeated in Gaza and hasn't achieved any of his military objectives inside of Gaza, nor in Lebanon, by the way. So what does that mean? Does that mean that he actually wants to completely ruin everything? Well, we heard signs. There were Hamas figures who said today that there are positive signs from the mediators that before Thursday, things are looking to be resolved. And by then, we are likely, they will probably receive the Palestinian prisoners. They will be released. Meaning, well, Israel and Netanyahu, they're saying things. And on the other hand, they're continuing. The thing that he's trying to do by removing the previous leaders of the negotiating delegation led by the head of the Mossad and the Shin Bet, and potentially sacking them at one point, by the way, because the Shin Bet in Israel started an investigation against close people, close aides to Benjamin Netanyahu and their ties with Qatar and being bribed basically by Qatar. And that bothered Benjamin Netanyahu very much. There's an internal war there that not many people speak about. And he wanted to sack the head of the Shin Bet from a while ago. But it's a clear sign, the fact that he's appointing Dermer to lead the negotiating delegation rather than the ones who have been negotiating for the past 15 months. What kind of sense does that make? Imagine you had someone leading a certain campaign and you found success in having that ceasefire and continuing. Although they could have secured the ceasefire agreement way before, by the way, the delegation, they already agreed, the delegation themselves, they agreed on the terms of Hamas from the beginning of 2024, just several months into the ceasefire, by the way. People need to remember that it's Netanyahu who constantly delayed, and they were criticizing him all the time. Now he's trying to have Ron Dermer so that Ron Dermer can play with the timeline of Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, his yes man / poodle, to do whatever he wants. But there are still progresses. The United States, despite its, wide boy attitude talk, they are still going ahead, and it looks like they do want to de-escalate. All right. This leads us to Yemen. In Yemen, the Pentagon declared that Nasrallah had an escalatory move. What's that escalatory move? A defensive measure. A defensive measure that hasn't yet been confirmed by Nasrallah or the Houthis in Yemen. What was it? Well, they shot an F-16 or targeted an F-16 and an MQ-9. They took over a dozen of MQ-9s, by the way, during the genocide in Gaza, because the United States and the United Kingdom, they led the genocide coalition to support Israel, a genocidal entity, against Yemen for standing up against this genocidal entity, and they were attacking Yemen and the Yemeni people. But now things have quietened down. So why is the United States still there? What's the problem? I thought that the problem was the Red Sea and making sure the trade goes and although Nasrallah said they were only targeting Israeli-linked ships. And of course, the United States and Britain put themselves in the abhorrent position of protecting a genocidal entity. So they started to face the consequences from Yemen. But a representative from Ansarullah, he responded. He made a response. What did he say? He said, well, firstly, I find it strange that, they're talking about an escalatory move. It's perfectly normal for Yemen to protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity, despite the fact that we still didn't have a confirmation officially from Nasrallah to carry out these defensive measures. So he's finding it bizarre. It's like, what do you mean you're coming to Yemen and you're calling it an escalation when I protect my land? And that's very important because that's their whole approach. Like Israel itself, they want to portray it in the minds of the people that violence is not problematic when it comes to them. Their use of violence is valid. The use of other people of violence is invalid. It's important for people to understand how they work and how they try to manipulate the people. They don't condemn violence. They don't have a problem with, not just violence, they don't have a problem with mass scale slaughter. They don't have a problem with genocide, mass murder, mass terror, kidnapping, beheading, infanticide. They don't have a problem with that. So long as it's them who are doing it, or their little pathetic genocidal entity in the region representing them. Isn't Israel always saying, we're a representation of, the Western values in the region? We're the only democratic state, and the Western establishments are still supporting it. Therefore, they're collaborating together. So they don't have a problem with any of that. But they have a problem when the victims defend themselves. Oh, then they start to label them, and they can't be there, and no one should challenge us. So the man is raising the most valid point from the beginning. What do you mean escalatory move when I'm defending my airspace? That's Yemeni airspace. Ya Habibi. You don't come to Yemen. Don't attack Yemen. Simple. We're going to defend Yemen. However, what does that indicate? That indicates that the US-British Zionist aggression against Yemen hasn't stopped. As a matter of fact, Britain was carrying out spy missions. Reportedly, was reported in declassified against the resistance during the ceasefire. The United States is leading these aggressions against Yemen now. Why? Well, they have a problem, and that problem is called having a force in Yemen that is able to stand up for us. They don't want someone to stand up for them. And the fact that they stopped now doesn't solve the problem for the militaristic oligarchy of the United States and its proxies across the world. Meaning, well, I need to find a solution for Ansarullah. I need to take them down. How am I going to take them down? I need to keep an eye on them. I need to keep an eye on them during the ceasefire. I need to keep an eye when there is a de-escalation. And by doing that, the United States is proving again its warmongering nature and its contempt for international law, total disregard for other nations as well. And combined, of course, with the aggression against Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria, both US and Israel, primarily, of course, alongside their allies, and the allies, don't like to say much, but act very loyal, in a very loyal manner, with them, like Britain, against the people of the region. Okay. They are the main contributors of instability and lack of peace and the spread of terror and violence. Why? Well, the rabid psychopathic dog leading the state of Israel is escalating on so many levels. He's escalating in the West Bank. He just went out of a genocide in Gaza, still breaching that ceasefire in Gaza. 50,000 people were forcibly expelled from their homes in Jenin. That's the West Bank. And guess what? Israel is telling them, you're not going to return within a year, at least. They're occupying points in Lebanon. They're saying, we're not going to withdraw because we need to make sure that everything is enforced. They're occupying parts of Syria. And now they're saying, oh no, Syria, they shouldn't even have military presence in South Syria. And we're going to stay here for an undisclosed period of time. Why are they doing that? They're doing that for two reasons. Number one, to cover up, again, the military humiliation and failure against the Palestinian resistance. That's number one. Number two, it's a continuation of their true nature. A neocolonialist, supremacist, violent entity of terror, imposing its will on everyone in the region. A very extremist, racist, violent minority planted by Western powers, imposing its will through mass terror against the people of the region. That is Israel. This is how it was founded. And that's problematic. Now, the question is, if the United States is indeed looking towards de-escalation, because there are contradicting signs, and you need to try and read between the lines to understand, where things could go. The United States, on one hand, if we talk about Syria, well, Trump, before his abhorrent statements about Gaza, although he already made U-turns, he said, I want to be, written down in history as a peacemaker. He's withdrawing from Syria. Okay. Israel is complaining. Why are you withdrawing from Syria? What do you mean withdraw from Syria? We thought we have a deal here. We have the SDF, the biggest chunk of Syria in the northeast. You need to stay there. We need to build a coalition with them. And they complain to the United States. So they're withdrawing and they're supporting a ceasefire. But they're having statements far, far more different than the actions on the ground. Iran took down one of their UAVs several weeks back, and they didn't respond. They didn't even report it. They didn't confirm that it was taken down. Again, showing weakness against Iran. But in the media, it's all, oh yeah, they can't, and we will, and they will leave Gaza, and we're going to control. Contradictions. That could be interpreted as the United States trying its luck with Israel. Israel is the barking dog, and they bark and they try their luck. If it works, good. If it doesn't work, we'll concede. Have we seen that in the past 16 months? Of course we've seen that. Guess what? We've seen that in the fact that Benjamin Netanyahu went into a ceasefire agreement. Phase 1, phase 2, temporary, not temporary, although we're talking about a ceasefire, by the way, agreement that has phases and includes clauses to extend phase 1 if no agreement has been reached on phase 2. So we're looking about a solid agreement. Otherwise, the Palestinian resistance wouldn't have gone into it. But he went against everything that he said from the beginning. No talks with Hamas until we eliminate them. They have two options, either submit or die. We need to eliminate the threat from Gaza and return everyone. Without talking, without anything. He was like, Hamas, you need to, with the military pressure, with the genocide. He went against all of that into a ceasefire agreement. In Lebanon, he didn't achieve his only military objective of the war, which is returning the Israelis back to the north. The mayors of the northern settlements in Israel are opposing the prime minister outright, saying, no, don't return because it's still not safe. How far will they try to do that? And will there be a prospect of things getting out of hand? I'll start with the second question. Yes, there is a big prospect of things getting out of hand, because no one should live with a psychopathic entity committing a genocide and the worst barbaric crimes in history. But the timing and how long it could stretch, this is where things get interesting. Israel's main aim is to recover from the damage, from the massive blow that it got to its image. This military might, this superior country with these superior people in the region dictating everything that happens and doing whatever they want and imposing their will, first and foremost on the Palestinian people. They were beaten by Gaza. They need to have a big act, a big show to prove people wrong. They need to have these moves, whether they're temporary or not. Temporary or not, we'll try our luck, like they tried their luck with Sinai, like they tried their luck with South Lebanon, like they constantly try their luck. A thief always tries to steal more. If he succeeds, great. If he doesn't succeed, he takes a step back. So at the moment, the situation is quite volatile. It's a dangerous situation. However, on the ground, things are still moving. Now, the fact that there was a confirmation from the Palestinian side, because a lot of things depend on the war with Gaza, on if things escalate or not. The fact that there were statements that are saying that there were positive signs, the fact that we've been here before and we passed things like that before, indicate that it's going to continue. For example, Israel is now delaying the release of these 600 Palestinians. They previously delayed the people from going back to the north. They delayed the implementation of the ceasefire. They delayed the release of Palestinian prisoners before. They delayed aid getting in. They did not comply with many of the ceasefire agreement clauses or humanitarian clauses. But things moved forward. These are indications that, okay, there could be an actual solution. And after things settle slightly and Israel tries to regain or believes that it actually did regain its image as a country that is both legit and powerful in the region, they can start conceding, start to kind of withdraw from certain parts in the area. And these were the main things that I wanted to share with you, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I'll open the space up, take a few questions. Good to see all of the usual viewers and members as well, subscribers too. Thank you so much for tuning in. IG to me, thank you very much. And Tony Soprano, his loyal bodyguard Haji Abu Ali is alive. I heard that. I did hear that. Thank you for that. And Algeria, welcome to membership. And Samiha, thank you so much for that as well. And everyone joining in. If any of you have any comments or questions, by the way, if you wouldn't mind highlighting them, so we can try and reach as much as possible. Let's go to okay. Christopher, Hamas should insist on all tents and shelters agreed upon that their hostages get released first before any Israeli goes free. Well, there's progress and things are going, but Israel will still have some delays. Now, the problem of getting all of the tents in and the temporary housing, Israel doesn't want to give any sign of hope. They are using the humanitarian catastrophe to achieve political desires or political objectives that they haven't achieved during the war. And that's something people should really understand. It's very important. So Israel couldn't defeat or couldn't even target properly the Palestinian resistance, and they resorted to a carpet bombing Gaza, targeting the civilian population. What was the reason behind that? Well, firstly, they are barbaric, immoral and depraved people. That's number one. They're terrorists in nature. They have bloodlust. But they also wanted to have that as leverage in case the Palestinian resistance doesn't submit. And the pressure on the civilians was intended to apply more pressure, because it's what are you killing? You're killing the family members and the people who are fighting. Some of those people who are fighting you, they're family members. Okay. Now there's a stage of destruction in Gaza. How do you have leverage? You have leverage by saying, I'm not going to get in anything for you to live. You know, food, maybe a bit of food, a bit of that, okay. But for you to think that you can live here, I'm not going to do that. Why? To extract political positions. What are they looking in relation to political positions? They are looking to disarm the Palestinians. That's number one. They want Gaza to be like the West Bank. A doormat sitting there, calling himself a president, an emperor, king, whatever it is, a bootlicker or a doormat sitting there, following orders, dealing with municipality issues, you know, like taking the garbage, you know, a couple of things to do with the, the street signs and stuff like that. Not people who are asking for national needs, national rights, historical and contemporary rights. They don't want that. And how did the Palestinian people, how did the Palestinian resistance get the Palestinian topic to go global? When did it start? It started on the 7th of October. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been here. And Israel knows that. All of the other attempts, talks, years, decades, nothing here really made a big difference, right? And Israel doesn't want that. And that's very problematic for them. So they're trying their luck with Trump to apply as much pressure on the humanitarian side. However, they will fail, because what they failed with, in spite of all of this genocide, 100,000 approximately tons of TNT landed on women and children, 3 times the size, 4 times, if not more, the equivalent of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki nuclear bombs. Over 21,000 children. Thousands under one. You know, if it didn't work then, what makes you think that it can work now? That's the biggest question. The second problem is, and that's where some in the Israeli security establishment oppose Netanyahu, it could make Hamas go harder on the next rounds. So they could be demanding next time, okay, no, we're not going to release first, you release first. Or simultaneous release, for example. We're not going to be, you know, taken advantage of. And that's something that some in the Israeli security establishment understand very well. And that's why they opposed Netanyahu and told him, no, don't delay. And that's why he had another meeting, to get the yes from his little poodles or his yes men. RMS is Hezbollah in a bad shape as the West claims. No, Hezbollah are in nowhere near a bad shape. Hezbollah are solid as a movement. Their hierarchy is intact. Their organizational capabilities are intact. Their military power is intact. They have been affected by the changes in Syria. However, there are other options for them. And Hezbollah don't just have Iran. The proof for all of that is, number one, in terms of power and hierarchical structure, is how they performed after the blows that they got from Israel. Why is that? It's because Hezbollah as an organization, they are able and are made in a way where they can independently operate without necessarily having a central command. For example, they operate in multiple parts of Lebanon. The Secretary General is killed, the deputy is killed, and so forth, so on and so forth are killed. They have regional units that can operate with a supply chain for long periods, and they can sustain themselves. So that's why they were able to succeed. That's why Israel, despite all of the bombardment in Lebanon, they did not. They hardly touched Hezbollah's military capabilities. And if you want to compare, compare, for example, Gaza to Lebanon. If Gaza is doing what it does as an enclave, as like a besieged area, imagine Hezbollah. They didn't just have Syria. They have other options. Hezbollah, they're more open. And that's why they were more vulnerable, by the way. And that's why they had bigger blows, too. Of course, the Palestinian resistance, they also had senior figures attacked, but they continued, see, because of the structure. So, no, they're powerful. And again, I think there's a misunderstanding of certain political decisions that they make that are interpreted as weakness. And that's also made up as part of the psychological warfare against the people and in support of a genocidal entity. Do you see Western mainstream media talking about the internal problems, for example, in Israel for so long? Do they talk about the actual casualties? Do they talk about the blows that they got? The coverage from the 7th of October moving forward, it was all propaganda and lies. So no, they're intact and they will remain intact. MENA, who gives anyone the right to say where does Palestinians go or what to do? Well, we live in a world where anyone can say what he wants, right? Freedom of speech. But I think the more appropriate question is why? Why do some people feel like they can tell other people where to go? Especially when you talk about the native indigenous people of the land versus the fake nationality, dual nationality, people who came from all sorts of parts of Europe and other parts as well, with their fantasies. It's people who are extremely racist, arrogant, and supremacist, and believe they operate on a moral high ground. I can tell the other people what to do. Oh, these people, they shouldn't control Gaza. Or, they wouldn't talk about the fake entity. They will talk about the original people. So, these are diseases, people with lots of arrogance and entitlement, sense of entitlement. And if people think that these superiority complexes and supremacy and racism, they don't exist. No, you're totally wrong. They exist very, very heavily with all of this. You're seeing in the case of Israel and Palestine, you're seeing a case of a Western creation planted in the Levant, supported by many Western establishments as a supremacist entity, as a country founded on the concept of supremacy, on the concept of I am of this group of people, therefore I am entitled for more rights, and therefore I'm spoken to differently. And the others are the others, therefore they are not viewed as even humans. And that's part of the dehumanization, the deliberate neglect and ignoring the suffering of the other people. That's intended to, degrade the people and their humanity. You need to understand that. And that's how they operate. Bon, yeah, thank you for that. You asked a really nice question. You said, do you have any clarification on what is happening with the PA and a clawback of the support funding for the prisoners and prisoner families? And is there a way for the West Bank not pay Israel tax? In short, in the West Bank lies an obedient servant for Zionism and Israeli occupation. Their fate is tied with Israel. Their existence is based on the existence of Israel. They have been negotiating what they call peace negotiations for 30 years with Israel, and without any progress. What they have been doing on the ground is legitimizing more land grabbing, more land theft, more oppression, more apartheid, more kidnapping, more killing, more abuse, more atrocities against the Palestinian people. So we need to start off from that point. That is the Palestinian Authority of the West Bank. Then you would be able to understand why what happens, such as them attacking the Palestinian resistance or the Palestinian Authority forcing someone to go on pension, like the person who was in charge of the prisoners in the Palestinian Authority, because he criticized the Palestinian Authority not supporting or funding prisoner families. And is there a way they could not pay Israel tax? They don't move without Israeli authorization. The Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen, he cannot move unless he's authorized to move by the Israeli Shin Bet. He previously said to one of the Arab leaders who had a summit, I think it was the Qatari leader at the time, when the Palestinian president did not attend, he said, they'll shoot me. So that's the reality of the West Bank Authority, and that's why they do what they do, because they're tied with the occupation. It's not like you're talking about an independent. The Palestinian president, he has less authority than mayor in Israel. Way less authority. And Jimmy Eyes will take the last one from Jimmy. I've seen something about Yemen leadership being threatened with arrest if they attended Nasrallah's funeral. What is that about? No, it wasn't arrest. There were senior leaders from Iran, the foreign minister, the head of the Shura Council. There were leaders from Ansarullah. There were leaders from Iraqi armed groups, the Popular Mobilization Forces. The grandson of Nelson Mandela was there. Several Western reporters were there. I didn't hear of anything. But in the case of Ansarullah, no. But we saw their signs also in Lebanon. And no one did anything. And we'll wrap it up there, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in for another live stream. Thank you, everyone who participated. Apologies, of course, who are not always able to reach all of the comments and participation. Thank you for everyone who sent supers. Apart from this, stay blessed, take care, enjoy your week ahead, and I will see you soon in the next video. Peace, everyone. Take care.